The story begins at one of the most well-known colleges in America, MIT. At this moment, we see Professor Gerald Lambeau teaching his math class.
I also put an advanced Fourier system on the main hallway chalkboard. The person to do so will not only be in my good graces, but also go on to fame and fortune, having their accomplishment recorded and the name printed in the auspicious MIT Tech.
He also motivates them by saying that some of his former students have solved questions like this before, and today they are at the very top in their fields. The problem is extremely difficult, so Professor Gerald Lambeau gives them time until the end of the semester so they can solve it comfortably. After the lecture ends, we see a man named Will Hunting, who works there as a janitor. He notices the math problem that the professor had written. Later, Will goes home and starts solving the equation on the bathroom mirror. The next day, when he finds himself completely alone, there he picks up the chalk and writes the answer to the problem. This is a huge deal because he solves the question in just one day. Apart from work, Will spends most of his time hanging out and fooling around with his friends. One day, while watching a baseball game, Will sees a guy who used to bully him back in school. The moment he notices him, Will's anger explodes. He walks up to the guy with his friends and starts a fight. In the end, while taking his revenge, Will beats the guy very badly. Before the situation could get even worse, his friends try to stop him, but by then, the police arrive. When a police officer tries to restrain him, Will even attacks the officer, which leads to his arrest. On the other hand, Professor Gerald Lambeau finds out that the math problem he had written has actually been solved. He immediately goes to check and sees that someone has solved his question perfectly.
Who did this? Jack? No way.
The professor becomes completely shocked. Later, his next class is completely full because everyone wants to know who the mysterious math genius is. Professor Gerald Lambeau says that whoever solved the problem should come forward because he wants to give them their prize. But the entire class just looks at each other and no one steps forward. When nobody comes up, the professor tells his students that he is going to write another math problem that took him 2 years to solve himself, and says that whoever that math genius is probably will not be able to solve this one in just a single day. Meanwhile, Will had just gotten out of jail. He went back to his janitor job and immediately started solving the new problem. At that exact moment, Professor Gerald Lambeau stepped out of his office and saw Will writing on the board. He tried to stop him, thinking that Will was just scribbling something randomly on it. But when Will saw the professor walking toward him, he quickly ran away from there. Later, when Professor Lambeau came back and looked at the board, he realized that Will had actually solved the problem that had taken him 2 years to solve himself. Now the professor finally knew who the secret math genius was. After work, Will met up with his friends and went to a bar to grab some drinks. There, after noticing a group of beautiful girls, Will's friend Chucky walked over to them and started flirting. To impress them, Chucky casually lied and said that he also studied at MIT and that he was a genius. Just then, a guy nearby interrupted and asked him which class he studied in. Chucky replied that he studied history. The guy immediately realized that Chucky was lying, so he began insulting him and intentionally started asking him difficult questions about history. Poor Chucky did not really know anything about it, so he stayed completely quiet. At that moment, Will stepped in to defend his friend and began debating with the guy. Once Will read something, he never forgot it. His facts and the way he spoke was so sharp that he quickly shut the guy down. Will even insulted him, saying that everything he was saying came straight from a book and that he was just repeating memorized lines. Mocking him further, Will said that the guy was spending thousands of dollars on college just to repeat things that he himself had read for free in a public library. After this, the guy got angry and left the place. Later, one of the girls named Skylar came up to Will and gave him her phone number. She was impressed by how smart he was and seemed to like him a little. Skylar told him to call her someday when he had time. Afterward, Will even showed that phone number to the guy who had been trying to act smarter earlier. Here we see Professor Gerald Lambeau searching for the janitor who had solved his incredibly difficult problem so easily. After asking around for a while, he finally gets Will's contact information, and then he goes straight to Will's court hearing. Will is facing charges for assaulting a police officer. In court, Will tries very hard to defend himself, but the judge says that he already has previous charges of theft and assault on his record. The judge explains that he can no longer ignore the fact that Will also fought with a police officer, and in the end, he sends Will to jail, saying that if he wants bail, he will have to pay around $50,000. With that decision, Will is taken to jail. However, there he meets Professor Gerald Lambeau, who comes with a deal for him. The professor tells Will that he has already spoken to the judge and is willing to get him released, but only if Will agrees to 2 conditions. The first condition is that Will must study mathematics with Professor Gerald Lambeau, and the second condition is that he must attend therapy sessions with a therapist. Will laughs when he hears this, but he also does not want to stay in jail and since he has no other option, he agrees to both conditions. Soon after, he begins attending math sessions with Professor Lambeau, who is completely amazed by how sharp Will's mind is. Now, according to the second condition, Will must also go to therapy, but no matter how many therapists he visits, he refuses to open up to them. On top of that, he even starts making fun of them. He would read the books written by those therapists the day before, and then show up the next day just to insult and embarrass them. As a last option, Professor Gerald Lambeau asks his old friend Sean Maguire for help, who now teaches psychology. At first, Sean says that he does not have time for all this, but when Gerald tries to explain that the boy is very special, and that if he does not get on the right path, he might completely ruin his life, Sean finally agrees and meets Will. Just like he had done with his previous therapists, Will had already read Sean's book and starts mocking him according to the ideas written in it. However, Sean remains patient and talks to Will in a completely normal way without asking anything about his life. During the conversation, Will notices a painting that Sean had painted himself. After seeing the painting and some art books, Will begins making random assumptions and starts saying all sorts of things about Sean's life. Sean still does not react much to what Will says, but then Will brings Sean's wife into the conversation. The moment his wife is mentioned, Sean becomes a little angry. Will quickly realizes that Sean's weakness is his wife, so he keeps bringing her up again and again. He asks Sean why his wife is not around and whether she ran away with someone else after cheating on him. Hearing this, Sean completely loses his temper and grabs Will by the throat. He warns him never to disrespect his wife again. Just then, Will's therapy time is over, so Sean lets him go and Will walks out, thinking that he has once again broken another therapist. Seeing Sean's mood, Professor Gerald Lambeau assumes that Sean will not agree to continue the sessions, but Sean says that he will counsel Will and tells Gerald to keep bringing him every week starting from the next one. After the counseling session, Will goes on a date with Skylar. During the date, Will learns that Skylar comes from a very wealthy family and is currently studying at Harvard. The two of them spend a wonderful time together, and at the end of their beautiful first date, they share a kiss. When Will came to meet Sean the next week, Sean said that they should go outside to talk. He took Will to a park and started speaking with him there. Sean told Will that he had thought a lot about everything Will had said before, and in the end, he realized that Will was like a little kid who did not even understand what he was talking about. He also said that Will was a bit rude. Sean told him that he understood that Will did not want to talk and that maybe there was some fear inside him, but he reminded him that someday he would have to speak up, otherwise he would end up losing all the good things life has to offer. The next day, Will went with his friend Chucky to work as a laborer at a construction site. He even called Skylar, but he was too nervous to actually talk to her. During his third therapy session with Sean, Will did not say a single word and Sean did not say anything either, so the two of them sat there in complete silence for an entire hour. The fourth session started the same way with neither of them speaking, but eventually out of boredom, Will told Sean a joke. Taking this as a hint that Will might finally want to talk, Sean asked him if he had a girlfriend. In response, Will told him about Skylar and explained how their first date had gone really well, but now he could not bring himself to talk to her. Sean asked why, and Will replied that he felt Skylar was too good for him and that if he kept seeing her, everything would eventually fall apart. He believed that sooner or later, she would realize that he was not good enough for her. Sean explained that no one is truly better than anyone else because every person has both good and bad qualities, and the only thing that really matters is whether that person is right for you or not. To explain this further, Sean talked about his own wife and said that she was a wonderful person and that he loved her very much, but sometimes she used to fart in her sleep. Hearing this instantly changed the mood in the room, and both Will and Sean started laughing openly. In that moment, the two of them grew a little closer, and Will finally began to feel comfortable around Sean. When the session ended, Sean advised him to go and talk to the girl. Will was so lost in Sean's words that Sean had to remind him that the session was already over. Taking Sean's advice, Will goes to Skylar's college and asks her out again. Skylar says that she would love to go out with him, but she has a very difficult problem to solve that might take several days. Will cannot wait that long, so he asks her to show him the question. The moment he looks at it, he quickly writes the answer on a napkin within seconds. After that, Will tells her that now she has no excuse left and asks her to come with him. During their second date, Skylar asks Will about his family, and Will lies to her by saying that he has 12 brothers. Skylar then asks him to tell their names, and Will immediately starts listing 12 random names in sequence. Skylar becomes a little suspicious and says that he might be lying, so she asks him to repeat the names again. But Will is a genius, and he repeats the exact same names in the same sequence. Later during his next therapy session, Will meets Sean and asks him if he has ever regretted meeting his wife, because after her death he must have become very lonely, and since since he loved her so much, the pain must have been even greater. In response, Sean tells him how he first met his wife. He explains that when he saw her for the first time, she was standing in line with her friends, waiting to buy tickets for a baseball game. It was a very classic match, and when Will hears this, he says that Sean must have been lucky to watch such a game live. But Sean tells him that he actually watched the game later on TV because he had left his friends to go on a date with that girl, the same girl who would later become his wife. Will cannot believe that Sean skipped such an incredible game just to spend a little time with a girl. Sean then tells him that he never regretted meeting her, even if she was only in his life for a few years, because those years were the most beautiful years of his life. Later, Skylar asks Will why he never introduces her to his friends or family. Will had still been lying to her about his life, but he agrees to introduce her to his friends. Skylar, Will, and his friends meet at a bar, and Skylar really likes his friends. All of them spend a great time together. Around that time, Professor Gerald Lambeau comes to Sean to ask about Will's progress. Sean tells him that Will has slowly started to open up, but it will still take some time before he becomes fully comfortable. Professor Lambeau then says that he is trying to find a top-level job for Will, and that Will easily crack the interview once his mental issues are sorted out. After that, no one will be able to stop him from making a name for himself in the field of mathematics. Sean responds by asking Gerald if he is Will's father, that he is making life decisions for him. Sean says that whatever Will wants to do, he should be allowed to do it, because just because he is a genius does not mean he should be forced into only one path. However, Professor Lambeau insists that Will cannot do anything else and that he will not let Will's talent go to waste. But Will has no interest in these kinds of jobs, so he sends his friend Chucky to attend the interview in his place. One night, while talking about life, Skylar asks Will if he would move to California with her. Hearing this makes Will nervous, and he says that he cannot go with her because his whole life is here. Skylar asks him why he is so scared when she knows that he loves her and why he never tells her the truth about himself. She also reveals that she knows he lied about having 12 brothers. When the lie is exposed, Will loses his temper and says, "What do you want to know about me? I am an orphan. I do not even know who my parents are. I spent most of my life being passed from one family to another. The family I lived with as a kid used to beat me like a dog." Hearing this, Skylar starts crying and tells him that it is okay because she is there for him and will stay with him no matter what happens. But Will pushes her away and says that he does not need anyone's help. Deep down, Will is afraid that if he lets someone get close to him and that person eventually leaves, he will not be able to handle it. Crying Skylar tells him that she loves him very much and will never leave him, but Will lies and says that he does not love her and walks away, leaving Skylar alone in her room in tears. After a lot of pressure from Professor Gerald Lambeau, Will finally agrees to go for a job interview. However, when he actually goes to the interview, he does not even try to get the job. During a therapy session, Sean asks him who he trusts the most in his life. Will answers that it is his friend Chucky. Sean agrees and says that Chucky is like a brother to him and would even give his life for him, but a person cannot spend their entire life only with friends. Then Sean asks him how he plans to earn a living. Will replies that he will keep doing daily labor because he knows construction work very well and can spend his whole life doing it, earning money and getting by. Sean then tells Will that since he has spent his entire life doing labor work, it has become his comfort zone and he is afraid to step outside of it. Sean explains that this very fear will stop him from living a truly great life. Sean does not tell him to simply accept the job Gerald is offering. Instead, he asks Will what he actually wants to do with his life. Will jokingly says that he just wants to herd sheep and goats. Realizing that Will is not being serious, Sean tells him to leave his office because he does not want to waste his time. He says that Will might have plenty of free time, but he does not, and if Will cannot answer honestly, he should just go. Hearing this, Will becomes angry and starts shouting at Sean. Sean once again asks him what he really wants to do with his life, but Will stays silent and does not answer. Sean then tells him to leave. Before Skylar leaves for California, Will calls her to say goodbye. Skylar tells him one last time that she loves him. Will smiles, but because of his fear, he does not say it back. Deep down, he still believes that in the end, his heart will only get broken. The next day, while talking with Chucky, Will says that he is not going to take any job and that now Skylar is gone too. He says the two of them will just keep doing construction work live nearby and live their lives comfortably like always. Hearing this, Chucky finally speaks from his heart. He tells Will that in 10 years he will probably still be around here, but if he sees Will here 10 years from now, it will break his heart. Chucky says that he has only one dream. Every morning when he goes to pick Will up from his house, there is a moment when he hopes that Will not be there anymore, and that he has gone somewhere to do something great with his life. On the other side, Professor Gerald Lambeau and Sean are arguing because Gerald cannot understand why Sean is not convincing Will to take the job. Sean says that they should not force Will to make such big decisions about his life because he himself himself still does not know what he truly wants. Sean explains that Will is afraid of being abandoned, which is why he never lets people get close to him. But Gerald does not agree with this and bluntly says that Sean should not let Will ruin his life and asks if Sean wants him to become a failure like him. Sean replies that he is not a failure and that he chose this life himself and is happy with it. Just then, Will walks in and overhears their conversation. Professor Gerald leaves the room so the therapy session can begin. This time, Sean has a file containing pictures of the injuries on Will's body from the beatings he suffered from his foster father. Will asks if Sean has ever seen a child beaten so brutally. Sean responds by saying that his own father was an alcoholic who used to drink and beat both him and his mother when he was a child. Hearing this brings back painful memories for Will. Sean then stands in front of him and tells him that everything that happened to him as a child was not his fault. Will nods quietly, but Sean keeps repeating that it was not his fault. Again and again he says, "It is not your fault, son. It is not your fault." Finally, Will says that he knows, but Sean continues repeating it, telling him to truly accept it. Hearing this, tears begin to fill Will's eyes. He pushes Sean away, but Sean once again calmly says that none of it was his fault. At that moment, Will finally breaks down. He hugs Sean tightly and begins crying uncontrollably. For the first time, he is ready to let go of the pain from his past and move forward. He decides that he will take one of the jobs that Professor Gerald Lambeau had arranged for him. With that, his final therapy session comes to an end. Will then asks Sean if he can come back someday if he ever feels like talking again, and Sean tells him that the door will always be open for him. On his 21st birthday, his friends all come together and give him a car. The car is not new, but Will is extremely happy with the gift because it comes from his best friends. Meanwhile, Professor Gerald Lambeau goes to Sean and apologizes for calling him a failure. The two old friends reconnect, and Sean tells him that he is planning to go on a world tour, joking that he actually earns enough money for it. While Sean is packing his things, Will arrives outside his house in the car and sees him getting ready for the trip. Will walks up to the door and leaves a letter in Sean's mailbox before quietly driving away. Around the same time, Chucky goes to Will's house to pick him up for work. He knocks on the door, but there is no answer. When he looks through the window, he realizes that Will is not home. Chucky smiles because he understands that Will has finally figured out what he wants to do with his life and has made his decision. Soon after, Sean finds the letter that Will left for him. In the letter, Will writes that he is not taking the job and that he is going to California to see Skylar. Reading this makes Sean smile as he walks back inside, thinking that now that the girl is back in his life, this genius will definitely do something good with it.